Hi, everybody. I want to welcome everyone to Spalding, and thank you for coming. My name is Jeff Schneider. I'm a physician here at Spalding, and we're really excited to have you here and excited about our lecture tonight. I have a few introductory remarks that I just want to pass on to everybody. The lecture tonight is sponsored by the Boston Harvard Burn Injury Model System and the Model Systems Consortium at Spalding. The Model Systems is sponsored by a grant from the National Institute of Disability and Rehabilitation Research. The main focus of the Model System grant is to foster a collaboration between clinicians, researchers, and community members with the ultimate goal of improving the lives of people living with serious injuries and disabilities. And so I think that's a lot of what we're trying to do tonight, and I'm happy to see so many people here with all different walks of life and interests coming together, which we're excited about. A few words about the format for tonight, just so you know what to expect. Carmen Tarleton is going to be speaking. She'll speak for maybe about half an hour or so, followed by a question and answer session. And at the end of the night, for people who are interested, Carmen's offered to do a book signing. She recently has a book that she published, which is being sold out front. And I don't want to be the one who has to plug it, but it's a really great book. So tonight we're very excited to have a very special person, Carmen Tarleton, speak to us about her experience in overcoming adversity. But first I want to introduce George Bassotti, who will say a few words to introduce Carmen tonight. George is a very active member of the burn survivor community here locally in the Boston area and throughout New England. I think almost every burn survivor that I've met has somehow had a chance to meet George during their time in the hospitals here in Boston. And I think that really says a lot about his commitment to burn survivors. He's been a leader of the burn survivors of New England. He's been very instrumental in supporting our peer visitor program here at Spalding that provides peer visiting to other burn survivors while they're in the hospital. And George, we really greatly appreciate everything you do on behalf of the burn survivor community, and would like to invite you to introduce Carmen here tonight.
You notice that all of the leaders have no hair. Jeff is a leader in the community too. But thank you for having me speak just for a brief moment. I'm a burn survivor. I was burned in 1979 in a gasoline explosion at my home in Westford, Mass, and sustained second and third degree burns over 85% of my body. And my passion for the last 35 years has been being a peer supporter at all of the Boston hospitals, meeting patients and families and offering them hope and inspiration, which we think is a vital part of the emotional side of recovery in burns. I think being burned is the toughest thing that a human being could go through, because physically we go through the pain and the surgeries, then only to return home to our community and face the social, psychological adjustments, accepting the scarring, sexuality. Will I return to work? Will the stiffness and tightness go away? How will the public react to me? So that's where we come in as peer supporters, is to pay it back in the community. I'm also excited tonight to have our first burn survivor dog here in attendance. Billy Bartlett from Plastow, New Hampshire, I met at the Brigham, and it's a great story, but his dog was also burned in his fire and helped save his life. I think the dog was laying on top of Billy, and so it's a kind of a great story. So let's give a round of applause for the first burn survivor dog. Her name is Roxy. Yeah. So as part of my peer support work at Brigham and Women's, it's been a few years back now, I lose track of time, but another peer supporter, Mike Paganelli, and myself were invited into Brigham and Women's to meet probably the most horrific burn injury that I've ever met in my 35 years of peer support and work in the burn community. And we learned that, Carmen was burned by abuse up in Vermont, and for the first several months she was in a medically induced coma. And I was so impressed that her family was there by her side. Her mom, Joan, her sister, Kessie, came from California and got very involved in the day-to-day dressing changes and burn care. And so after Carmen was awake Mike and I started, visiting Carmen, and I think our visits, made a difference because she started meeting other people that were burned as severely, as her. So it's quite a journey. I don't think I've ever met a burn survivor that epitomizes everything that someone could go through, from a burn, by abuse, to battle through, the surgeries, the physical pain, and to overcome that pain. And I think the title of her book, Overcome: Burned, Blinded, and Blessed. The most intriguing part is, what is the blessed side of her story? And I think Carmen has a lot to share, with the community, and I think you'll find her story rewarding, uplifting, and I think it will help many of you, whether you're burn survivors or not, in how do you deal with disappointments in life when things don't go wrong. Can you turn lemons into lemonade? Is the glass half full or half empty? And Carmen, I think, epitomizes that, and I am so proud of how far she has come as a burn survivor, and she has returned to become a productive member of her community and society. So we say that in burns, we do not let our burns define who we are as people. People love us for who we are on the inside, what we have to offer. And Carmen is a beautiful person on the inside, and we were so excited that she was the recipient of the 5th facial transplant here in Boston by Dr. Pomahawk. So with no further ado, let's give Carmen, my friend and burn survivor, a real warm welcome. Carmen Tarleton.
Hello? Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for coming tonight, and especially thanking Lynn for setting everything up for me and making it so easy to get here and to be here and take care of my sore knee and all the little things she's taken care of. Thank you, Lynn, very much. I'm gonna assume that most of you know my story, that I'm gonna put my story in a little nutshell for those who don't know or don't recall. Back in 2007, my ex-husband attacked me one night in the middle of the night. And he beat me with a baseball bat and drugged me from room to room, where he isolated me in my older daughter's bedroom, and doused me with industrial strength lye. At the time, I didn't know what it was, and I was in and out of consciousness through the whole time, and it was only a 15 or 20 minute period this went on. So when the police finally arrived, I huddled into the shower, and I went blind within minutes. But the funny thing was that when I heard the policeman's voice and I woke up for the last time, I was very happy. I was very happy inside because I was still alive. And I didn't know what he had put on me, but when I heard the policeman yell, I knew I was alive, and the thought of dying didn't cross my mind again. That was it. So now looking back all these years, I know that propelled me forward. It put me in a different place that I may not have been in to survive all that I did. I went to the local hospital first, which is where I live in the Upper Valley, which is Dartmouth-Hitchcock. And they transported me here to the Brigham, where I stayed in a coma for 3.5 months. And then after I woke up, I came here to Spalding. I was here only 5 weeks. I had a goal to be home by Thanksgiving, and I was, with much crying and stamping my feet. I did get home for Thanksgiving. My sister took the brunt of what all had to be done with my dressing changes, and it was a quite overwhelming ordeal. And a very intense part of our life, that she did a great job, and I felt very fortunate to have her and my mother and my daughters and me all in the same house, doing everything we could to get by and to get through it. And looking back on it, we did a great job. We did a fine job. We did what had to be done, and that was all we had to do, was what needed to be done. And I'd learned so much from this experience that it did lead me to write a book. And I was publishing that book March 1st of this year, and coincidentally, you could say, I had my face transplant done 2 weeks before it was published. So I'm working on the second book, because it doesn't cover the face transplant. So I'm working on that as well, and I'm finding that just being who I am is just so helpful to not just myself, but to everyone who comes to hear me talk and who's friends with me on Facebook, and I just feel so much appreciation to be able to help somebody just by sharing my story, just by being who I am. I don't have to be anybody special. I don't have to do anything cool. All I have to do is be honest and share my story. And I think that's, for me, that's a great way to live. And I'm really appreciating that. And so I am going around as much as I can to promote my book and to share my story. And I did get an article a couple of weeks ago in the New York Times, and the Katie Couric show read that article and ended up doing a little show on the face transplants, which will come out tomorrow. So I'm going around doing all I can to spread the news. You can't help anybody if they don't know who you are. So that's sort of been my goal, is I can't help anybody if they don't know who I am. So that's sort of what I figure is my job. But in the beginning, when I was recovering, and I had initially I felt my recovery was going to be 1 to 3 years. It didn't sound right, but that was wishful thinking, and that's what I wanted it to be. I think now I'm at the end, and it's been 7. The first few years were, of course, the hardest, and I was completely blind for the first 2 years. And of all the challenges I have faced, being completely blind was the hardest for me. And it maybe, my daughter had just asked me the month before this event happened, like most kids, what would you rather be, blind or deaf? And I said, deaf. I don't want to live blind. And within a month, I was completely blind. And I was 39 years old, and I hadn't reached an age of appreciation on many levels. And after being attacked and going through all I went through, it has shown me so much appreciation for so many different things that we don't even think about or even comprehend on a day-to-day level. And I was just living my life what I considered very normally. I was raising children. I was going to work. I was a registered nurse and had been for about 20 years, doing shift work, raising my kids. I was thinking about, okay, what's for dinner? When am I going grocery shopping? Are the kids okay? And I didn't really think much about other than that daily living. The daily routine swept me up, and I think the daily routine sweeps us all up. And like I said, I was 39. I hadn't gotten to a point to where I really felt I knew what life was really about. So after the biggest event in my life happened, I had more than enough time to figure that out, and it was a necessity did I figure it out. Because I knew some things didn't add up. I knew I did not deserve it. That was a given. I never held any shame for what happened to me. I knew I didn't deserve it. That I couldn't really figure out why it had happened and what that was all about. And that's what I wanted to know. So I think we all come to our own conclusions, and whether, people choose religion or any other kinds of, ideas or whatever, none of that. I pass no judgment on that. It's whatever works for you. And for me, what worked for me was I wanted to figure out some secrets of life. I wanted to know why negative things, big bad negative things happen, and why, for one, and what were they all about, being in a positive, mostly a positive place. I was pretty much a positive person, outgoing, outlooking, always lived by the golden rule. So yeah, I wanted to know how it related to me as well. So I had a lot of challenges in the beginning. In the first couple of years, my challenges were pretty much just physical, just getting through that day, that dressing change, that shower, that meal, whatever it was that day. And those were the toughest days. And for those of you that are still there, I promise you it will change. And that's what I kept in my mind. This too shall pass. This every day won't be like this forever. That is a given. So I just tried to hold on to that. And I couldn't think, I had to live in the moment. I could not think of next week or next month or die, oh Lord, not next year. I couldn't think that far ahead without having a breakdown, because I just couldn't go. I couldn't go there. I didn't have any understanding of what really happened and why. So I stayed in the moment and focused on what was happy for me, which was my family and my kids, and just living in the moment and doing everything I could to keep my spirits up, because I noticed very quickly that if my spirits were up, everybody's in the house's spirits was up. So I knew I could help in that way. I couldn't do much for myself for quite some time, and everything was being done for me. And I appreciated that, and I let them know that as often as I could. And I thought, well, if I have a job, it's to keep my spirits up and help them do what they got to do, which is take care of me. And it was a heavy load to do all at home. And I knew that, and I knew that all along. And I knew there would be so much richness at the end of it that no one would regret doing it the way we did. And no one did. No one's regretted it. We've all grown so much that I believe us five women that lived together, me, my two daughters, my sister and my mother, wouldn't change it now, wouldn't go back and change it if we could. We've all grown so much, and we've learned so much about ourselves and so much about each other, that there's just such a wealth of information coming out of just such a negative event. And I used that negative event to try and figure out why they all happened the way they happened. And some of them, some negative events, on the outside, they look pretty understandable. Somebody's driving drunk, somebody hits somebody and gets hurt, that's all understandable. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the direction your life takes, your unconscious when you're unconscious about the direction your life is taking. And I was quite unconscious about after I was injured. I was unconscious about what my life was really about. But there was a moment 3 months before I got hurt that I was all upset. I was getting divorced for the second time. I didn't like it. I didn't want to be divorced, that I didn't know what I wanted. My life was fine, but there was no juice in my life. Was I doing what I was supposed to be doing with my life? I was just really, 38 years old and really confused, maybe even starting some midlife. And I was home alone one day. The girls were at school, and I was just crying. And I threw my hands up in the air, and I'm not a religious person, but I do believe in higher power. And I just cried and I screamed out loud, "I don't know what to do anymore. Show me the way. Take me if you want. Show me what you want me to do." And that was the first thing I remembered when I woke up. And I told a friend of mine that, and she said, "Did you really mean it?" I said, "At the moment I did, that I didn't know that's what it was gonna be." And then I really started thinking about that, and in every challenge, I took every challenge one by one. And my eyesight being the most sensitive to me, as soon as a couple of years passed and I had some eyesight, then to me that I was done with that. I had some eyesight. I didn't need to see 20/20, although I do have a dream of that. I had enough eyesight to get around and take care of myself more than I was. So then I would just move on to the next challenge. And they would come pretty quickly. And one of my challenges was I was disfigured in the face. Not only was I 80% burned, but my whole face and head and neck were all burned as well. And it took a year for me to work through that challenge. And I didn't feel good about myself, and when I didn't feel good about the way I looked, I would go out. I always went out in public. I never isolated myself. So when I would go out in public, I would make little kids cry. They'd get afraid of me. They'd think I was a monster or something. And that would just make me feel worse and worse. So that being the toughest challenge, I started relating. The better I felt about myself, that I just felt like I was reflecting the world. The world was telling me how I was feeling. Because when I didn't feel good, the kids cried. When I felt good, the kids would come to me. And no matter what, it didn't matter. And so I thought, well, it really doesn't matter what you look like, does it? And so I started coming up with my own philosophy, my own way to live. And I listened to probably over 100 different books. Some of them on a religion, some of them, on surviving this or that, or self-help books. There are just a lot of different books I started listening to, and I pretty much took what I wanted, which I felt worked for me, and used that and incorporated that into my life of how I thought. And one big thing I needed to change was some of the ways I thought about things. Some of the negative things I had always thought, because they're sort of in our culture, they're in our society, they get passed down from person to person, from parents to children, to the children. And it's just something that gets caught in your psyche, and I wasn't even aware of a lot of negative, thoughts I would have in my head all the time. So I started really doing a self-examination and just sort of figuring out, well, if this is your life now, what are you going to do about it? And I really felt like I could make choices. When I was in a coma, I had a dream that life was a choice. And that was another thing I woke up remembering, was that I was talking to someone and I said, "You mean life is a choice?" And this voice said, "Yes." And I looked down and there were all these doors, like different kinds of doors, different colored doors, doors to houses, doors to apartments. And I said, "So you just come down and you pick the life you want?" And this voice said, "Yeah, pretty much." And I said, "So if I want to live in the country and be a foreigner, I can pick the country door?" And this voice said, "Yeah." And then in my dream it stand back, and all of those little doors I was seeing and looking at, all those lives, was a little speck of dust on somebody's kitchen floor. And what I kept from that was, life is a choice. Life is a choice. So when I woke up, and I really felt strongly that I chose to stay. So if I chose to stay, it didn't really matter what happened to me. It didn't really matter who did what to me. It was already done. So that was just one challenge to overcome, that didn't need to take my whole life. That, I didn't need to have something stuck stuck for the rest of my life. And in our society, what I kept hearing was, you never get over it. You learn to live with it. You never get over it. And I didn't like that. I said, well, I'm going to be the example of that, because I'm going to get over it. And it's not going to bother me. I'm going to move on, and I'm going to make people see that they have a choice if they want to make that choice. So that was sort of my secret goal. It wasn't like I was out there spreading the news or anything at that time. I was just those were just the things I was thinking and the thoughts I was coming up with as I lived day to day with really little to do except for recover. And my recovery took so long that I was working on a plan while I was recovering. And I was working on a plan, if I didn't have my eyesight, then what was I going to do about that? I was always looking for a way to get around it, to work, get diet, to go through it somehow. I didn't want to feel like I was limited. If I was blind, okay, that I'm not going to be limited. If something else happened, I wanted to feel like I could have a full life regardless of what my body was doing, regardless of whether or not I had my eyesight, regardless of whether or not I had a relationship again, regardless of any of that. I wanted to find a way that I could feel like I was limitless. And so those are the kinds of things I was thinking. And those were the kinds of dreams I was having. And I told myself, dream as big as you want. And I didn't tell anybody how big my dreams were, because they were outrageous at the time. They were outrageous. But they were something that I wanted to go for, because I felt we had a lot more control in our lives than we know. And I wanted to prove that to myself. I wanted to know how much of that was true, how much control do we have. So by the time I got to writing the book, I had just been put on the face transplant list. And being on the face transplant list was a big ending for me. I didn't know how it would be, but I knew when Dr. Tomahawk called me and suggested that if I was interested in looking into the face transplants and maybe I'd be a candidate, I knew that was for me, and I knew that call was meant for me, because my biggest bone of contention had been throughout my recovery was my neck. I had such bad scar bands on my neck. Some of you remember I couldn't hold my head up, and sometimes they get really big and inflamed, and every time Dr. Tomahawk did a surgery, they just got worse. I didn't know what else to do, and then accepted it to the best I could. I had already accepted my disfigurement, and I started speaking in 2011, just out to the local, the local church, or any group that would have me come, I'd come and speak. And I was, just sort of practicing. And I had accepted what I looked like. I didn't care anymore, and I told myself, someday someone's going to see through me through these scars, and it doesn't matter when that happens. I know that I can have a relationship again, that last relationship doesn't need to be the last one in my life. And I just sort of said, that person's going to be very special, because he's going to see something maybe without even knowing what he's seeing, and I'm going to know it. And I just chalked it up to that, and I didn't think much of it for many years. And I just went around and did what I was doing. That the face transplant was a necessity for me, and I knew that was a way around my quality of life improving greatly. My quality of life was not very good up to that point, because I was on, the medications, and I didn't feel good. I was tired all the time, and my neck hurt all the time. I just had such physical ailments that it was hard for me to get much done. I mean, if I did a load of laundry in a day, that was a good day. If I cooked dinner, and I'm talking hot dogs, that was a good meal. I just really didn't have anywhere near a normal energy, and I still don't today. But it certainly is improving greatly now. It is improving greatly, leaps and bounds now. But one of the other things that I remember really not knowing at the time, knowing now, but not knowing at the time, which was very important for me because I was abused by someone else, was forgiveness. And the thought of forgiveness didn't come to mind for many years. The first few years, hardly at all. The first 6 months, my mother and my sister both forgave him and told me so. And I understood that. And I said, well, good for you. You shouldn't be weighed down by that. And they said, we can't go on if we can't forgive him. We've got to get him out of our heads. And forgiving him did that for us. And I understood that I didn't apply it to myself. I didn't apply it to myself at all. I wasn't revengeful. I wasn't hateful towards him, but I certainly hadn't forgiven him. And I came to a place 3 years after my injury, after George had come up and visited me. I think it was in October, in the fall, either that or Christmas time, in that area. And George started talking about forgiveness and people, hurt by the hands of someone else. And I was respectful to George, and I told George this, that my arms were crossed and I was a little pissy, because what did George know? Not true, George. But at the time, I wasn't ready to hear it, and here George is talking, about forgiveness. I'm like, okay, George, all right. So I was respectful, and that was it. But George knew what he was doing. He was setting the seed for me to have to go back there and do that, and I appreciated that later. And it wasn't that much longer later, within 6 months, I had gone to the forgiveness challenge. And at the time, I didn't see it as a challenge. At the time, I didn't know how to do it. So I bought a book. Louise Hay, at one of her talks she did, I think out of the country. I'm not sure what country she was in. A talk she was doing, and in her first paragraph of this talk, she said, "You can't get very far if you don't forgive yourself and forgive others." And then she'd use the line, "Victims of victims." None of us get away with not hurting anybody. None of us do. We all hurt each other. We all deserve forgiveness. So I listened to that, and I really started wondering how this was going to work. How does it work? Do you have to go through a workbook? How do you do this? Well, I just sat several times, by myself. I talked about, heard, like he was sitting in the room. And I talked to him, and I talked about us. I talked about our relationship. I kept our relationship positive because most of the time it was. We didn't have the typical or stereotypical problems that some people like to say happen in abuse situations. But I think every abuse situation is different. And I had several conversations just like that. And I felt better. After every time, I felt better. And I got to the point where I felt, well, I think I've forgiven him because I feel different. So I started testing it. So I told my sister and I told my mother, and they couldn't respond. Really? I said, yeah, I think I've forgiven. Oh, okay. And then I went to World Dern when it was in Galveston, Texas, and I went to, they had one of the side, sessions on forgiveness, and I went to that, and I just listened, and I could tell who had forgiven, and I could tell that I had, and I can't tell you how it happened, except I can't tell you how it happened. I only can tell you what I did and what I said and how I felt. That's all I can tell you. Divine intervention, I'm sure. And I just was pretty quickly unburdened with anything about him again. And that's when I really saw that I could overcome anything that had happened to me. Anything and everything. Once I was able to forgive him, it propelled me to the next thing and to the next thing and to the next thing. And that just gave me more confidence and more confidence. And I don't like it when things go bad or when things go negative or things don't go my way. But now at least I know it's just a different route than I think it should go. The universe is going to take its own path, and I'm here for the ride. So I'll just hush up and wait and see what happens. And every time I hush up, things end up okay. Not the way I thought they would, but the outcome is always the same. So I just try to focus just on the outcome and I start trying to figure out how it's going to happen. How is it going to work? I don't know how it works. But now I realize I don't have to know. All I have to do is focus on what I want and be as positive as I can be. And that works real well for me. And that's one of the big things that I like to share the most, because sometimes we make it a lot harder than it has to be. And I'm finding it's not, the more you practice, just like anything else, the more you practice, really the easier life gets, no matter what it's throwing at you. So I'm going to end my talk with something I wrote for this occasion. And I'm going to try and read it as smoothly as I can. And I'm sure there's so many of you in this room that can relate. I know now, after going to one of the most negative places possible, while still remaining alive, that I can now go to my heaven on earth. There is nothing to lose, only joy to gain, and it only comes from within me. I had complete control to make choices that lead me to happiness or not. When you know this and take sole responsibility for being here, it gives you an incredible amount of confidence and security. We don't stay in this place always, as falling out of place lets me know that I can get back there. I had so many times before. Using negative events to your advantage to propel you to the next place in your life is what we came for. Evolving and expanding with joy and happiness is the essence of who we are. No big mystery, really. We have only forgot to remember once here. There is nothing more comforting than the knowing of why you are here, who you are, while having nothing to prove and nothing to lose, and knowing that the journey with all of the contents is exactly as it needs to be. Once the negative event is over, leave it alone. It will only bring more negativity. You can't find good solutions in that. So if anybody has any questions, I never had a question I wouldn't answer, so.
Sure. Do we have a microphone, another microphone around besides the one that Carmen's been using? Oh, good. Oh, good. So Carmen, thank you so much. Your story is really an inspiration to us all. Your resiliency, your ability to survive what you survived, your ability to forgive. I mean, I know it's been an inspiration for me, and I just finished reading Carmen's book. I made sure I was finished before I ran down here. I was reading the last 20 pages, and it's really, truly an incredible book. So that's a plug for your book.
Thank you.
Carmen.
Thank you.
Did it. So does anyone have any questions? Questions from anyone? Do you know, Carmen?
I did have a question. So I have to apologize for being a psychiatrist and asking. I have to apologize for being a psychiatrist. I don't know. Is this good? Can you hear me?
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah. There you go.
I'll speak louder. I
Okay,
can't.
that's all right.
This technology is beyond me. I'm so impressed at the way you have used adversity. The art of living is the ability, as I see it, to use adversity to grow and in a constructive way. That I call thriving. So it's quite clear to me and everybody else around here you're thriving, and I really admire that. As a shrink, I just don't understand what happened that someone would want to do what this person did. And maybe it's none of my business, and maybe what you said, well, it's done, and not to dwell on that. But the reason I'm interested is that I work with people who do crazy things like that, connected with McLean Hospital for many years. And I just wondered if you could cast some light on that so that I could be helpful to people who do crazy things.
Well, the only thing I can tell you is he did not have a very good relationship with his mother. And 3 months before he did this, we had filed our paperwork for divorce, and we were friends. I was making him a cup of coffee. And he said, I don't think I ever told you this, but my mother's disfigured. And I didn't even, disfigured, what's that mean? Like, where? Oh, her face. And I said, really? I said, why didn't you tell me this? What happened? Oh, I don't know. One of her boyfriends or something happened, and somebody splashed hot water in her face. That was the story, and it was that quick. He wasn't a man that told his secrets, but he also he also was pretty jolly guy. He wasn't a miserable person to be around by any means until the end. Until the end, he was miserable to be around. That he was not living through his true self. It was my theory. And he hurt me because he had bottled up lots and lots of anger through his childhood and through his life, and mostly about women, and I was the one that he was with, and I took the brunt of it. I'm not a shrink either, but that was my short nutshell reason.
Do you know, Carmen, just to follow up with that, having just read your book, you contacted his social worker at the prison after you went through this process of forgiveness yourself, because you thought about telling him that that you had forgiven him, hoping that it would help him, which
Right.
is remarkable. So maybe you want to speak to that.
I had, after I forgave and I knew I forgave and I felt so much better and I felt like I could take on any challenge I needed to do, and I really felt like it wasn't just for me. I had forgiven for myself, but because it had been successful, could it be successful for him as well? That was my question. So I called the prison system. I have a lady there who connects with me in anything in regards to him. So I called her and I said, can I talk to Herb? And she was like, what? And I said, I just want to let him know that I've forgiven him and see if that will help him. Well, I opened a can of worms that I didn't even know about through a process. And they came down to interview me, and they called, he's not in the state anymore, so they called him down where he is and did all these lengthy interviews to see if it would be okay. And long story short, after she came back to me, after she talked to him, she said, he's not in a good place. He doesn't even take responsibility for anything he's done. He's, and she said, after I talked with him, Carmen, I had to go for a walk. She was shaken up and creeped out. And so I knew right then that nothing had changed for him. And if nothing had changed for him and he was still as negative as he was that night, then my forgiveness wasn't going to help him. I felt he needed to be in a certain place of positivity of somehow for my forgiveness to help him. And I didn't feel he was there, so I never told him. But I always let her know if things changed for him, and that's something because they go through therapy and all of that in prison, then I certainly, I'll do that. And why shouldn't I? What's done is done.
Yes?
Yeah. Do you think with the
Yeah, do I have
like we're on over it? Do you think with the forgiveness process, you think the fact that your husband was incarcerated helped with the forgiveness, or did that have any effect on your that process?
I don't know, because from the time I woke up, he was always incarcerated. So I never went through, I know some women, of course, go through being scared or, when somebody's not in prison. I never went through any of that. I didn't have a nightmare for 3 years. And the nightmare I had was just creepy. It wasn't even a nightmare. So I was never afraid on that end. But I was happy that he was incarcerated. I was happy that I had no worries about that.
Carmen, you went back to the house where this happened. How did you make that decision, and did you make it with your children and with your family?
Well, I made that decision on my own. I didn't know at the time the family was trying to make other arrangements for me. thinking that me and the girls wouldn't want to go back to that house. But the truth was that that house was brand new. I just bought it. It was a year old. We picked that house. He didn't pick that house. Me and the girls picked that house. I like that house. And so, and where else were we gonna go? Nobody's gonna buy that house now. It's still empty, by the way. So I was in rehab and I was wanting to go home so badly. So one day the girls came to visit me and I said, girls, listen, I want to go home. And they said, yeah, Mom, we know. And I said, no, I want to go home to our house. And they said, oh. I said, do you guys think you can handle that? And they said, well, do you? And I said, I think I can. I said, let's try it because, he's taken so much from us already. Let's not give him the house that we picked. Let's try it. And if anybody has any problems, we'll leave. And we all agreed. And I asked my mother. My mother stayed there the week before I got home. And then, my sister was okay with it. The first night, my mother slept with me, and my sister slept with my daughters. And that was it. Nobody had any ill effects, and it was just our house. So, I did stay for the first 4 years, and 4 years later, it was time to leave. I was starting to write my book. It was weighing on me. So that house did end up weighing on me. I wanted to write what I wanted to write, and I didn't want to be in that house anymore. The time had come. I wanted to stay in the house. I wanted to show the girls, it's just a house, it's our house. And by the time the youngest one got out of high school, started her senior year, we moved to an apartment. And that was mostly my doing as well. I'd had it.
I wanted to link something Martin Luther King said to something you said today. He said unjustified suffering is redemptive, and I would say that equals heaven on earth. And that's what you call your current state, and I call that thriving. Anybody who sees that life is heaven on earth is thriving. And I think it's a consequence, all of us. Life has nothing but inevitable adversities, some worse than others. But I think at the end, it all kinds of balances out. But to use those adversities to grow, I think that's the lesson of today. And there's nothing worse than unjustified suffering. And to find heaven on earth, that's just as good as it gets. That's thriving. I think you're a wonderful example of how to do that. Thank you.
And Carmen, what you've said is that you're happier now than you were before you were attacked.
Oh, yes. Yes, and I have a great life because I just feel and think so much differently than I did. I know I've grown a lot. I'm a much better person. I'm a much better sister, mother, and friend. I'm much more open. I can feel what's going on. And I'm so much more aware than I ever was before. I used to have all these feelings all the time, but I never knew what they were or what they were about. And I never bothered to pay attention to figure it out. So, well, yeah, maybe life said, hey, figure it out. And I did. But the thing was, is once you accomplish something so great, and for me it was my survival and my thriving, I know there's nothing that I can't do if I want to do it. And I have a lot of patience. I can wait. And sometimes I have to wait. And I have to incorporate other people because I can't do everything myself. So I look for those people that, are in the same place I am for whatever reason. That's how I feel. I was with Dr. Tomahawk before he did the face transplants. He was my doctor before all that. Things like that. Nothing's a coincidence to me.
Carmen, some people have put in questions on the website, so I have one here. There was a question, what advice would you give to someone who has recently left the hospital and is recovering from a major injury such as a burn?
Well, I never like to give advice. I only like to share my own story, that if someone's just, home recently from a big burn or a big injury, the best immediate thing I can tell them is to make sure they ask for what they need. Because it's really hard to ask when you can't do anything for yourself. Even me, it was really hard for me to ask my sister for the 20th time to get me a cup of coffee, when she was tired, and I would always suggest that people ask for what they need from the people that are taking care of them, even if it's hard, because they got to do that. That's the only thing they can do for themselves sometimes, is ask.
And you're a very special person, Carmen.
Thank you.
And in overcoming this adversity, you're helping a lot of people. Is there a sense of satisfaction and healing in doing so?
Oh, definitely. I live for this. I live to come out and share my story. So that's why I don't shy away, if it's media or TV or, any of that stuff, or even church. Some ladies from the church group want me to come. There's only 10 of them. Fine. We make things work, and other how it works. I know I need to do this. I'm not obligated. This is what I do until I know I'm done, until something else takes its place. But for now, I know how important it is, because I think this is world changing, and I so wanted to be the example of that. That we don't have to live with it anymore. That we don't have to, have that caught in our craw for the rest of our years because something really bad happened to us, whether we knew it or not. And I thought that would be world changing, and if I was in the position to do it, then that's what I should be doing. And it wasn't even the should part. It was almost natural. I think that's why things happen the way they do for me. It's almost like magic.
Well, it sounds like you've learned to really listen to your intuition, to what your heart is saying, to how you're feeling, and that seems to lead you down the path that is right for you.
Yeah, and I know everyone has a different path. I don't share a lot of the details of my daily rituals or the books I read, because everybody's so different. What works for me isn't going to work for you, and what works for you, Charlie, isn't going to work for me. So that's why I just look at everything that comes your way. If it comes into your life, take a look at it. Maybe you can take a piece from it, or use something that will help you, and live your life like it's all about you, because it is. It's only about you.
Question, Carmen, if you were in a new relationship, right, what qualities would you offer that new individual? What things would they find about you that are attractive in your new relationship?
You mean nine new relationships or a new relationship?
Either your new one or one.
Well, my new relationship started last December. I started taking music lessons, and I fell in love with my music teacher.
And he fell in love with you.
For as scarred as I was, for as disfigured as I had the willies in my stomach every Wednesday afternoon. And I didn't say a word, because I wasn't going to say a word. But he did. And I was just amazed, because he saw me through all of that. He saw me, and he felt me, and that meant the world to me, because I was on the list to get a face. I'd waited a year already, And the thought had crossed my mind, you know, it'd be nice to meet somebody and fall in love before I get a face, because then you know they knew who you were, right? And but that's okay, it doesn't matter, I said, it doesn't matter. And it happened. I started lessons in December, and we hit it off in January, and I had my face in February on Valentine's Day. Of all days, and he came to the hospital every weekend until I got out in March. And he's, well, of course, unbiased, he's the greatest guy in the world, and he's the greatest guy for me. And it just worked out. I was not ready. I was not thinking that would happen, nor was he, and it did. And boy, you know, I can't get any more appreciative than that, than having him in my life.
We have a question here.
Hi Carmen, I'm happy to be here. I bought your book, I haven't read it, just bought it. My question is, this gentleman, is he the father of any of your kids, and what your kids think about it?
The man who hurt me.
Right.
No, the man who hurt me was my second husband. My children are from my first husband. And I hate to speak for the girls, but I think they're pretty much have forgiven him as well. They were angry, especially the older one was more angry in the beginning, because they just, you know, it was hard for them. They were 12 and 14. They watched me suffer a lot more than I could hide. I couldn't hide it all the time, and I tried. But through the years, they have done well. I don't think it has interrupted their relationships. They're now 19 and 21.
Do we father any kids at all that you know about? Or?
Did he? He did father one son that I never met, who actually I think is only 6 years younger than I, so he might be only 39 or 40 years old now.
Thank you.
Did you have a question back here? Jeff, did you have a question? No. You know, it's 10 after 7, so does anyone else have a question? Anyone? Dick?
Just want to make a comment. Now, I think your story is unique, because every person's story is unique in life. But it seems that if you have any type of adversity in life, whether it be a disability or whether it be in poverty, whatever it is, if once you overcome it, then you really get to the top of life and you really stay there. There's nothing else that seems like will ever be as challenging to you as this.
Well, I know one thing. I know you don't have to go back. If you really overcome something and you've really dealt with it, you don't go back. And I know that, and there's a lot of satisfaction in that. And I also know that even though this is the hardest challenge or the biggest event of my life and the most negative, I'm waiting to the biggest, most positive event in my life, and that's still yet to come. And that's what I think about.
Well, on that note, I think that's a great note to end on. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.